In 1997, Saputo made the decision to take the company public. This was in an effort to raise $160 million in cash, which was used later that year in the acquisition of Stella Foods for $560 million, by far Saputo's largest acquisition. The strategy behind this effectively tripled Saputo's revenues, taking it from a $1 billion company to a $3 billion company. And it is with this entrepreneurial spirit that we have seen Saputo grow to the company that it is today. Good afternoon, Mr. Saputo, esteemed members of the board. My name is Jalen Gadia. These are my colleagues Natalie Reamer, Npv Calculation, and Eva Mishevich. And we are here today to present you with our growth strategy for Saputo. So let's bring us up to date. We know that Saputo is the top 10 dairy processor in the world, with over $7.3 billion in revenue for 2013. We also know that you have effectively divested your European productions in the UK and Germany. And this is because you want to focus your efforts more on critical mass. In January 2013, you acquired Morningstar for $1.4 billion, your largest acquisition to date. And finally, as of 3 months ago, you acquired Warrnambool for $500 million, making your first step into the oceanic market. So now that we're up to date, let's move forward. I will be taking you through the current situation. We will then be taking you through a 3-step strategy, justifying it financially, and finally concluding. So, let's look at Saputo's financial and overall strategic position. Currently, there is lots of long-term debt capacity as shown on your balance sheets. You currently have a debt-to-equity ratio of 7.3, which leaves a lot of room for you to capitalize on long-term debt. As well, you have a consistent stream of cash flows, which has been fueling your acquisitions year over year. And this is very important. From a more strategic standpoint, you want to target markets with critical mass. As well, you can improve the operational efficiencies of your target. And this has led us to the conclusion that strategic growth through acquisition is in fact the best strategy. So let's look at some growth opportunities that you have identified. Here are several geographical areas where you have identified that there is an opportunity for Saputo. Let's first take a look at Europe and Russia. Now, when it comes to this, there are 2 sides to the play. There is production as well as satisfying global demand. So in Europe, you have Belarus, which could provide you with low-cost production and processing of your products to service demand in growing areas such as the Ukraine and Russia. However, as we have seen, the European market is mature and more saturated, with not as much room for achieving your target of critical mass. Next, we'd like to look at South America, Argentina and Brazil specifically. In Argentina, your operations have been going well. You have 2 plants currently servicing the demand of Brazil, as well as other European countries. However, we've seen a 15-cent per liter increase in Argentine milk price, which is one of the original reasons why you went down to Argentina, as well as volatility of the Argentine currency as imposed by the governmental monetary policy of the government. Now looking at Canada, you are the number one dairy processing company in Canada. However, with the current restrictions on milk supply, as well as limited growth, we have decided to target 3 potential geographical areas, namely domestic with US, as well as the oceanic region through Australia, New Zealand to service China. You know the US market, however, it is currently highly fragmented, but this leaves room for consolidation through acquisition. As well, with the Asian market, you can target this critical mass. However, you can do this through your New Zealand and Australian productions.
Great. Thank you, Jalen. So now we're going to look at our executive summary. So as we know, Saputo has a goal of being the best dairy processor in the world. And how are they going to do this? Well, first objective is financial performance. Financial performance means we're growing revenue, but at the same time we're mitigating costs. They have a very strong cost leadership strategy. So how do we think that would be best serviced? We say target growth through acquisition in the American market. This is going to ensure financial performance growth, as well as increased brand awareness and the brand portfolio extension. Secondarily, we have another goal to offer quality products on a global scale. We have a 2-step strategy for this. The first step would be establish production facilities in the Asian Pacific region. This will give us proximity to these growing markets, so we have proximity to establishing critical mass. And secondarily, we would want to enter the Chinese dairy market through a domestic acquisition. And this would be important because the Chinese market is so difficult, it's very difficult. There's a lot of regulation. We think it's extremely important to leverage knowledge when entering this new market. So, Saputo, we believe, is positioned for growth. Saputo's strategy up to this point has been smaller acquisitions that kind of grow piecewise function, as we can see in this bottom line. And this is getting Saputo somewhere, but we think it can go farther. We're using Nestle Dairy Products as the global best dairy processor benchmark, and their current revenue is $23 billion. We think that if Saputo employed a strategy that took a little more risk on in the beginning and looked at larger targets, which is well within their leverage ratio, we think they could really increase their growth strategy and decrease the time in half that they could reach where Nestle's current revenue is today. So to speak a little bit about this, first of all, why the United States? Well, a few reasons. It's a fragmented market. There's a lot more opportunity compared to the Canadian market. We're also already operating in this market. We have a new Morningstar acquisition, we've had production plants there, we know the market. And third, it's a developed market with sophisticated taste. We're not just introducing cheese or dairy, instead we're looking at coffee creamers, dessert options. We have a lot more brand portfolio expansion ability. And so when we're thinking about who to target in this market, a lot of players like Danone are small pieces of huge multinational conglomerates that are headquartered in France or other countries. That'd be a difficult target to try to take away from a large company. However, we have Chobani. It's a unique company. It's young. It was founded in 2005, and the current founder is actually looking for either a liquidity event and to exit, or have a large investment by an investor in the market currently. They have very strong brand equity. Chobani is known for sponsoring the Sochi Olympics 2014. They have Super Bowl ads. They're a well-known American brand, and they put a lot of money behind that, which we would reap in goodwill. Most importantly, their strategic goals align with ours. So they have been trying to enter the Canadian market. However, they couldn't attain milk supply contracts in time. So their permit for importation ran out. They were unable to enter the Canadian market effectively. However, it's still one of their top strategic priorities, and we would be able to offer that to them. Also, they already have entered the Australian market. That's in line with where we're looking. They have very competent management. They have a president and COO, which is under the founder, and he controls all operations. So if the founder were to sell the company, you would ensure a steady stream of operational efficiency, and we would probably enhance operations given our our cost leadership strategy. There have been PR events of merit to note. Whole Foods is no longer carrying the brand. They announced that in December. As well, there was an FDA recall of 80 units for a fungus issue in September. In light of that, we believe the acquisition price of $2 billion, which we've calculated, could be negotiable. At the same time, we did this off an EBITDA multiple of 7.7 times. We looked at precedent transactions, and they usually use around 7% of revenue as the cash they put forward in acquisitions. That leads us to about $700 million in cash from operations and long-term debt of 1.3, which is, they only have a 0.73 leverage ratio at the moment. So our MPV on this would be almost $1.3 billion, and we think this would be a great strategic partner as well as financial growth target. Now I'm going to pass it off to Lupino to talk a little bit more about our widening the growth strategy.
Thank you, Natalie. As my colleagues have stated earlier, that the ultimate goal of Saputo is to be the best dairy processors in the world.
Saputo.
So, thank you. So here we have this chart to illustrate that where is the next step they should take in order to become a real global player. So here we have China, ranked as the second largest market dairy after USA, in which we already have our presence in that market. So now let's take a look at China. In order to export our product to China, we need to have a new production plant in which we see the opportunities that lie in Australia and New Zealand with the free trade agreement and the local industry know-how. So here, the objective of this strategy is to offer a high-quality product in the global scale. But since the beginning of this year, we already acquiring to the Australian market. So now let's take a look at the New Zealand side. Why New Zealand? Because the farmers in New Zealand receive no subsidies from the government. Thus, they have a low cost but high productivity farming system. They have an industry know-how, and they also have the proximity to the Asian market, in which is feasible us to the China market. For which company we would like to acquire in New Zealand? Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to guide you through this decision matrix. We derive with the 4 companies: Open Country Dairy, Tato Cooperative, Zinlet Limited, and Fonterra Brands, in which we come up with the 4 criteria in order to choose, which are financial performance, product offerings, capacity, and the distribution network. From here, you can see that Open Country Dairies is the most suitable company for Saputo to acquire it in order to establish a strong foothold in this Asia-Pacific region. Why? Because it has a revenue that modest of 105 million Canadian dollars, in which illustrate that there is still room to grow for this company. It has 3 processor sites operating at a full capacity. Also, it has an international presence at the 45 countries worldwide. And lastly, the most important one is the value and performance metrics of this company aligned with our Saputo goals, which are production efficiency at low cost, dedication to quality, and employees' commitment. For the acquisition price, we set it at 84 million Canadian dollars, derived from the EBITDA multiples of 7 times. This will be financed by the cash from operations due to the NPV of 26.5 million Canadian dollars. But more importantly, this Open Country Dairy will open the door for us to expand our customer base to China, in which my colleague Eva will guide to you our third strategies, capture the lead in China. Thank you.
So, now that we have our hubs at Australia, at New Zealand, next thing we need to do is target Chinese market. So first of all, when we did our analysis, we found out that China is the 2nd largest retail market. And also, we saw that it's very fragmented, which means that us, as a foreign company, not domestic one, can enter the market and use that potential more significantly in order to grow afterwards. Also, we have a 60 billion Canadian dollars of total dairy retail value and a forecasted market size growth of 25%. So, also, what made us think about China as the best opportunity for us is the opportunity to grow organically. Then there is this promotion by the government when it comes to whole dairy industry. There are changes in lifestyles and trends, and also there is this domestic decrease when it comes to domestic products and production itself, which states that China is the best opportunity for our further growth. So when we thought about China, we wanted to see what is going on in the market itself. So throughout thorough analysis, we saw that there are 4 top domestic players when it comes to the market share. But on the other hand, we have 61%, a portion which is held by smaller companies. And that is what we need to target. We need to find a smaller company in order to enter China and acquire that company in order to grow successfully. So we wanted to see how are the revenues, which are the revenues of those companies. We wanted to see the brand awareness itself. Also, the distribution network, is it strong, low, poor, does it need investments? And then we came with a decision matrix that China Dairy Group is the best opportunity for us compared to Guangxi Royale and Alps Nutria Dairy. So, once we've acquired China Dairy Group, we need to see which cities we should focus on first. So we did an analysis to see what is the best city to go, comparing by inhabitants, GDP per capita, and also trends. Throughout our analysis, we saw that Shanghai is definitely the best option for us. We want to go with whole our portfolio, but we want to focus on infant formula firstly, then we need to go with yogurts and cheese due to the trend that is growing within these categories in Chinese market. We want to have a price which is in line with our competition, since Chinese people, when it comes to grocery shopping, are price sensitive. We want to be present mainly in supermarkets and hypermarkets, since these are the formats which are most favorable and most visited by our target group, and of course the online presence is necessary. but also we want to focus later on as a further way of growing on fast food industry, and we have a benchmark of Lupino cheese food, which entered Pizza Hut and like fast food industry itself. All of this would be covered with promotional activities, BTL, ATL, and also out-of-home advertising. So when it comes to numbers, we want to use Morningstar's metrics and go with sales price multiple of 1.7 times, and we have a current revenue of $120 million. So it leads us to acquisition price of 204 million Canadian dollars, and all of this would go through cash from operations. This leads us to an MPV of almost $100 million, but most importantly, it is a steady foothold for further growth in Chinese market and also in Asia market itself. Now Natalie will tell you something more about financials overall.
Thank you. Okay, so we kind of did a little bit of sensitivity analysis on our MPV numbers. And you can see the range from base to best case was 1.4 to around 3 billion at our best case. It is a large investment. We're proposing a riskier strategy. We're saying that Saputo should acquire companies that are larger than they're used to and try to ramp up growth faster. But we've staggered these investments, and once we're out of the third-year period and the acquisitions end, we do see returns right away. And then hopefully the top growth line would be favorable. But contingency plans. There are risks to all of our ideas, and how are we going to deal with those? The first risk we identified is not being able to acquire one of the companies that we targeted. Now, we did a lot of geographic analysis that we based all of our recommendations upon. And we are very strong believers that the geographical areas we have suggested are the targets that should be stuck with. Therefore, we propose looking at a smaller company or partnering with a complementary company still within these markets. So some tactics for that would be HP Hood, which is an American company, large brand portfolio, as well as Lupino Foods, another American company. They're the world's largest manufacturer of mozzarella cheese, and they have partnered with Pizza Hut and Domino's to supply a lot of their cheese needs, especially in the Asian market. And then Guangxi Royale has a lot of domestic presence. It's not one of the two largest main players. However, it has very strong brand awareness, especially in urban areas, which is our focus. Secondarily, a risk is what if the Canadian market becomes deregulated and foreign producers are allowed to come in and really establish supply chains here in Canada? We think this would be a big risk because Saputo has a lot of traction here in this market. Therefore, we would look to consolidate domestically within this market. And we did a portfolio analysis as well as a company history, and we think that AgriPure, with its Quebec base, as well as the products it offers, would really align well or best out of the other domestic players here. So Jalen, would you like to wrap it up?
Sure, thank you, Natalie. So when looking at implementation, in 2014, we would like to focus our efforts on acquiring Chobani. After we have done so, we would really like to focus on expanding their operations, such as bringing them into Canada, and also leveraging their current resources in Australia, along with our Warrnambool acquisition. Secondarily, open country dairy in New Zealand for 2015. As Npv mentioned, there is potential to increase the growth and production of this company. However, this would really serve as a foothold to our third and final strategy, which is to acquire China Dairy Group. Now, this presents itself with an opportunity for us to really increase our market share in this Chinese market, and then potentially look forward into moving into other Asian markets such as Taiwan and Japan. So, Mr. Saputo, you have said that you were better off going with your gut and being wrong than waiting for the perfect scenario to make decisions. International trade and investment liberalization is at a high. Interest rates are at an all-time low. And what does this provide us an opportunity with? It provides us with an opportunity to push the throttle forward through a high-growth strategy via acquisition. By bolstering our presence in the United States, as well as feeding a growing trend for citizens who are craving dairy. Not only will you be able to increase your financial position, however, you will be able to be a true global player, ultimately allowing you to accomplish your goal of being the best global processor of dairy in the world. Thank you very much. We now open the floor to questions.
One question, I mean, I understand your strategy and I personally like it. The question is, I'm a finance guy, so could you walk me through, and it's a big position, you got Morningstar, this one, and at the Chobani as far as leverage. Show me where you are. I mean, the company had never had a lot of leverage. Now you're going to increase it. I know it has room. Where will you be as far as financial leverage, and how do you plan to reimburse your debt?
Sure. So I think they have a little bit of bank term loan available too, but it's only about 20 million, I think. So, and they're, in the history of the company, they've always pulled on their bank term loans for a lot of debt capacity. That's not what we are suggesting. We are suggesting issuing long-term debt. I think, let me go to, excuse me. This was our MPV calculation that we did, right, to calculate our MPVs, and just, we used a discount rate of 5% and kind of projected it forward.
I'm more on leverage, cash flow, cash leverage.
We didn't recalculate the leverage when we took it out, but right now they're at 0.75, including the Morningstar calculation, right? So we said they'd pull out, we didn't calculate it after Chobani, but they'd be taking another, 1.3 billion in long-term debt based on just the Chobani deal, which I think would still put them under the 2 times benchmark for leverage. So, and that was
2 times that EBITDA.
Exactly, EBITDA. Yes, EBITDA. So I think that was in their corporate strategy. They're really hesitant about increasing beyond 2 times. So when we did our checks, we made sure that we were under 2 times with the Chobani acquisition. And then they have debt due in 2014 as well as 2016. So this would probably be, we're looking at 2020, 2021 for maturity levels, 5 to 7 years. And so I would assume that the leverage ratio would go down after this fiscal year because they'd be paying off 2014. So then the leverage ratio should maintain under 2 times, even including the smaller acquisitions in New Zealand and China.
Can you go to your implementation timeline, please? And I understand what you're trying to accomplish here with your recommendation, but going into 2016 to start working with China, isn't this like too late? We may miss the mark and someone else might, jump in before us? Why wait until 2016?
So I guess the reasoning behind this, 2016 is a year and a half away. We wouldn't want to rush our introduction into the Chinese market simply because we would like to have a strong foothold with production in New Zealand first. And we do feel that trends are growing. I think the Chinese dairy market, correct me if I'm wrong, is supposed to be growing at 25%. However, there are certain areas that are growing at like rapid rates of over 100%. So we really feel that this is going to be consistent, and we, with a year and a half to spare, can do it properly as opposed to rushing it.
Because, you're waiting for the perfect opportunity, okay? But I mean, right now it's a good opportunity because the Chinese market is open for this kind of stuff. If you wait 2 years from now, someone else might steal the opportunity.
Okay, so there are competitors, our competitors, for example, Nestle and Danone, who are already in the Chinese market, but what we wanted to do first is to gain this thing at the domestic US market with Chobani. For example, because Chobani is now looking for some other company to invest in them, and that is why we decided to prioritize like that. Just because of that, and that is why we looked into trends from 2013 until 2016, which is when we want to enter China, and for that period it is projected to be at a growth of 25%.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking at all this and it seems rather ambitious to me to be pursuing all these different things pretty well. Every year there's some huge thing going on, and I'm wondering if we have to do all of them because I don't know about our internal capacity to do all these things. I understand that I understand getting to China from New Zealand and Australia. It's the Chobani one that's jumping out at me as, isn't that going to stop us from being able to do the other ones?
So our rationale behind the Chobani acquisition was really to take us back to in 1997 when Saputo took the risk of going public and acquiring Stella Foods, which was a major acquisition and tripled their revenues. We are suggesting that currently, because Saputo has been growing at a steady rate through smaller acquisitions year over year, it's time to maybe take a bigger step and really increase that growth rate, which we feel Chobani is a great way to do. However, we have still maintained that with Chobani, we're only financing it through about $700 million in cash, which is about, from operations, which is what we typically produce, which is what we produced this year actually. So it's still not stretching ourselves too thin, and we also want to finance it through the long-term debt, which will allow us to do that. So while it may place strain for 2014, that's our one major acquisition for 2014, and then moving forward, cash flows from operation will support further acquisitions with open country dairy as well as the China dairy.
Why do we want to buy a company with fungus and their products?
I can answer that. So I think the wheats, they're very small PR events. 80 jars have been contaminated, but it really hasn't deteriorated any of the brand equity within the American market. Most Americans weren't aware of that. The bigger one I would say would be Whole Foods. And Whole Foods, it does make sense from Chobani's not a very complimentary product to be in Whole Foods. When people go shop for yogurt in Whole Foods, they're looking for small labels, something that they know is uniquely grown by goats roaming on certain meadows in a very distant place. Chobani you're looking for a yogurt that you know you're being healthy, but it's mass produced. And I think most people buy Chobani convenience store buys, road trips, grocery stores, supermarkets. Most of their sales were not through Whole Foods anyway. So we don't think it would deteriorate any of the traction that Chobani has within the United States market. Plus, it's such a huge brand. And for Saputo trying to grow domestically, which if they give up growing in the domestic front and just kind of stay status quo and try to grow in China, they're really giving up a lot of opportunity because people's, I guess, consumption for dairy is growing here and there's a lot more opportunity. So we're trying to balance both those things and you get a great brand that people really are going to recognize and Saputo would have. I think that would do a lot of good for the company.
Can you just take us through the financials of the Chobani one, seeing as that's where all the money is in the proposal right now? Can you take us through that?
Sure, actually, if you want, I can show you first. So just looking at the M&A concept we kind of used, this is their current revenue, EBITDA, about 10% here. So we applied this multiple, and that's getting us our acquisition price for the background of how we came up with that price.
Why did you use a lower multiple than Morningstar? Just like yours.
Yes, go ahead.
Just because in terms of revenues and EBITDA, Chobani is larger. That was our justification for keeping it about the same. I think it was a 7. I think Morningstar was actually 7 times EBITDA.
No, it's 10. But also the founder of Chobani has actually been in talks with investment banks, and he's looking for 2.5 billion at the max. So we assumed in light of current PR events that might have dwindled a little bit. But that's the number that investment banks have put on the street so far. So that's kind of what led us to a lower multiple.
Do you consider any other companies? Because we typically don't like overpaying, and it seems like we might be pushing the envelope. Is anybody else that we could have maybe looked at instead?
Thanks. Okay. So we did consider some other companies. We looked at the top producers and kind of went down the list for where they would start to be affordable. And where they started to be affordable was with HP Hood. The issue with, or the points about HP Hood, they have an excellent brand portfolio. They are a lot in dairy creamers, Bailey's coffee, dessert, a lot of things that we don't currently specialize in, however, could be great brand extension, not exactly core competencies. They seem to be very efficient and they also employ a low-cost strategy. But they've been a New England company since 1846. They're very strongly American. We were very weary about the potential for Canadians to come in and take a piece of the company. In addition, they're larger. It would be about a $2 billion acquisition. So then moving down, Lupino Foods we thought would be an interesting partner, not an acquisition. They supply all the mozzarella cheese to most of the fast food networks. And so this would be a really great partner, however, we wouldn't have any ownership. So we think that that wouldn't totally be our growth. That made us a little hesitant. And finally, we looked at smaller companies, like Great Lakes Cheese Company. And there were quite a few of them, smaller, family-owned, very in line with Saputo's strategy of acquiring smaller companies. However, most of them are high quality and putting aside cost leadership. So they'll sacrifice maintaining that bottom line if they can increase quality, which we thought would lead to a lot of culture conflicts with Saputo as a company.
The time's now up. Thank you.